Vamos a ver. Este no quiere. Yeah. Tengo algunos documentos, entonces, tenemos tiempo. Vamos. ¿Ah? Okay. That's very
Buenos días. Pues ahora tenemos la gran oportunidad de escuchar esta plática. Tom Anderson es un investigador de la Universidad de Pittsburgh y ha trabajado por más de 20, 30 años en Sonora. Y es de los que hicieron esta teoría del Mojave-Sonora Megashear. Entonces, él vino a una conferencia magistral del Seminario Minero y le pudimos invitar para que nos platicara aquí. Es una invitación aquí de Tardes de Geocafé, de la Dirección de Divulgación de aquí de la Unison y el Colegio de Oceanólogos de Sonora. Y pues espero que tomen nota porque va a estar muy interesante la plática. Pues les dejo con Tom Anderson.
Gracias, Amabel. Y buenos días, damas, caballeros, geólogos. I'm going to speak in English, and the reason for that is I would like to speak in Spanish. My Spanish is okay, not very good, but I have many slides. And to enable us to move smoothly through the talk, I'm going to do it in English because I can do it better and faster. I don't know much about this. This really was a talk that is designed for the conference on mining, specifically gold mining, and the relationship of gold mining to the Mojave-Sonora Megashear. And because I don't know much about gold, I spent a great deal of time. And the reason, we were starting our work in Mexico, we always told the ranchers that we have no economic interests. And so we steered away from all the mining because they were, as soon as if you said you had economic interest, they'd say, well, you need to pay me to go on my property. So we steered away from there. And I didn't spend any time learning about the gold mines. So in preparation for this talk, I spent a lot of time, days and days, and actually a couple weeks, going through all the mining reports that are online in the computer. And you can find a great deal of information. And it was quite interesting to me because it is compatible with many aspects of the Megashear. And this whole concept of the Caborca orogenic gold deposit belt, it just it overlaps with the Megashear. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this particular model that I'm showing on the board in the slide. It's only a model, and it's an ideal model. But what is real about it is the relationship of the principal strand, for example, of what's called the Mojave-Sonora Megashear to these to these other strands. And along these strands, there are basins, or what are called pull-aparts. And within this belt, there's a lot of what's called transtension, which means that there are a number of splays or strands of left lateral faults that are connected by what are called steps. And essentially all of these are what are called releasing steps, so that they make basins or holes where the step takes place. So we'll talk more about that, but we'll just develop this idea. So keep this in mind. And these yellow dots are mines. And some of them are actually mines that are worked, or they're mining districts. Tajitos, for example. There's no mine called Tajitos, but it's an old mining area. La Virgen is another. It's a little mine that I visited in the Precambrian many decades and decades ago, along with Republicana. The rest of them are all either prospects or active mines or inactive mines. So what I'd like to do is I like to characterize the Mojave-Sonora Megashear, give you some ideas about why it has been proposed and what we were thinking about when we started the work, and the relationship to the distribution of it. And then the relationship, if we have time, if you don't get tired, the relationship of the Mexico-Alaska Megashear, which is what I've discovered. And I recently published another volume. You know, there was this Megashear volume that came out in 2005 through the Geological Society of America. And then I kept finding things that I said, this seems to match with the Megashear in Sonora. And so I've now extended it. So really, the Megashear is a plate bounding fault. It violates what's called the global plate circuit. And I've gone to some very nice places, tectonic centers, Oslo, Norway, and Italy, and they say, Tom, you're crazy. This can't happen. And all I can say is that what we see, and in this latest volume that I put out, which is number 513 at GSA, is that the Great Valley of California, the Gulf of Mexico, the Central Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the South Caspian Sea, all opened at the same time. And they are linked together by a big fault, and that is they all opened after 170 million years. The Megashear started at 169, as best we can tell, and by 148, it was essentially dead. Maybe a little active, but mainly dead. And during that time, the North America plate, actually the whole Eurasian plate, North America, Europe, and Asia, rotated clockwise, more or less 15 degrees, about 800 kilometers. So the Mojave-Sonora Megashear was the first place that we came upon this enormous fault. And we'll try and tell you why. And then the last thing is the ages and conditions under which gold deposits formed within the plate border zone. And it turns out that despite the fact that the Megashear is a middle Jurassic feature, it didn't seem to be full of gold at that time. But since that time, the Megashear has been a conduit that accommodates the passage of gold from wherever it originates, perhaps in the mantle or in the lower crust, because very consistently these great big faults seem to be the pathways that accommodate the movement of gold. Now, what drives that? Well, it's not clear exactly what drives that. It could be magmatism, but it doesn't seem to be directly related, for example, to Cretaceous magmatism. Sonora is full of Cretaceous plutons, but it doesn't seem to be full of Cretaceous gold. The gold is still concentrated more or less along this big fault. So the big fault seems to have an important bearing on the emplacement of the gold deposits. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that important deep faults that may cut through the corteza, the crust or corteza, provide pathways along which gold-rich fluids commonly move. And interpretations, the gold deposits along the Mexico-Alaska Megashear in Western North America and along other major fault zones record multiple episodes of mineralization in response to extension followed by contraction. That's another strange idea that I'm developing, and I don't know if it's right or not. So let's continue and see what we come up with. This is some more. John Nurse did a PhD in Sonora on core complexes, and then he consulted for one of the mining companies. He's a very good field mapper. And these are some points that he made about things that seem to be common denominators, or they're related to most of the gold deposits. And you have presence of shallow dipping subhorizontal fracture zones developed with quartzo-feldspathic rocks, and then positioning of these fractured low-grade mineral zones above narrow, steeper, high-grade ore bodies. In other words, the ore bodies that are in the steep, big sinistral faults, strike-slip faults, commonly come up to a point, and then the gold is distributed along these gently dipping structures. In addition to that, you need what he calls a cap rock. So it's some rock to basically hold the gold so the gold moves out along low-angle structures. And then you need something to drive the gold fluids, some heat, presumably to make them rise. And the source of the origen of the gold remains speculative and elusive. But nevertheless, you can see the ore bodies that cluster. The Caborca gold belt clusters or includes the Mojave-Sonora Megashear zone. So this is just a map to give you a sense of how the idea about this big fault developed. And many years ago, almost 50 years ago, I went to Caltech. I had been working in Guatemala along what's called the Motagua fault zone or the Chisoy-Polochic fault zone, and it was very frustrating because the fault is so big that you can't see the displacement in Guatemala. And so I met a guy down there, and he said, you should go to work with this guy at Caltech, Lee Silver, because he's working on the San Andreas fault. So Silver had pointed out that right there's a mountain range called San Gabriel, and it's close to Los Angeles. It's northeast of Los Angeles. Has very distinctive rocks. It has rocks that are called anorthosite. They're white rocks. They're all plagioclase, and the age of these rocks is about 1.1+ billion years old. They are different from any rock that we know, basically, in the United States. Now, at that time, the ideas about the San Andreas, it was recognized that San Andreas is a big fault. So the San Andreas is a dextral fault. So the movement is that this side is moving to the north. So Lee's idea was that the anorthosite must come up along the fault from someplace down here in Mexico. So I've been working in Guatemala. He says, you get down to Mexico and find this anorthosite. So there was another advantage that we had, and that is that Silver had also recognized these two terrains here. Well, this is the Yavapai, 1.8, 1.7. This is the Pinal, 1.7, 1.6. So the idea, the working hypothesis at that time was that the boundary between these two terrains would project right to northwesternmost Sonora and southwesternmost Arizona. And that we would go, or I would go, and I would go through the Yavapai here, through the Pinal, and then down in here someplace in Sonora, I would find an anorthosite. So we started to do that. So what happened was that in this slide, what you see is, well, when we first started, the first place we went was south of Caborca in this place called Berruga Hills, or Bamari Ranch. And at Cerros Berruga, there was Precambrian rock. It had already been identified, but it had not been dated with zircon. So we went down to date it with zircon. But by the time we've done, in about 1970 or so, we could see that this Yavapai was bending to the south. And then as we continued work, it was bending more and more to the south. So we began to worry that this was too much of a bend. It couldn't be just an orogenic, big fold or something like that. And then In addition to that, what we began to find was that northeast of the boundary here, in fact, northeast of Caborca, there are all these Jurassic rocks. And we weren't finding any Precambrian rocks. So we just found some strange things. And finally, in addition to that, in Caborca, the Caborca area and the Caborca block has a cover sequence that is very similar to what you see in Death Valley. So you go all the way up here to Death Valley, and then you find these similar rocks. So we ended up with a picture that looked kind of something like this. Here's the Caborca block. And then this is an area where there is very little Precambrian exposed, but a lot of Jurassic rocks. And then here's the Pinal. Now, one of the things that was missing was that there were a lot of plutons over here that kind of had an arc signature, a calc-alkaline signature, but there was no melange. There's no subduction zone. So we were looking for a subduction zone. So one of the things that supported the idea is this work by Jack Stewart, a very well-known guy and an expert on Neoproterozoic and Cambrian rocks. And Jack, in 2005, wrote a paper and said, you know, if you look at the Cambrian and the Ordovician in the myogeoclinal section of the Great Basin, it compares very favorably with the section here in Caborca. And you can use this very good line. There's a line there where you go to zero. In other words, there's no Cambrian to the east of this point at this latitude. And he said, and you know, I think I find that same line down there. And if you connect those, it turns out that line, which is provides a piercing, what's called a piercing point, is about 800 kilometers apart. So that was very exciting. And the same thing is that here you have some other interesting rocks. You have archaeocyaths shown by A, and you have some glacial deposits. And the USGS guys, Barney Poole, and also working with some guys here in Sonora, began to find in eastern, well, it's kind of central Sonora, they began to find some of these same units. So Jack felt that this was a viable way to have those similarities separated by a big fault. Now, you could also choose to wrap these things around, just wrap them around the edge of the continent. But you always have this big gap in here to deal with, very big gap. This is a map that I made for this volume in 2015, and it shows some of the relations. Don't do that. It shows some of the relationships. Don't slip. It shows some of the relationships here in Sonora. Be very careful. And here's the Caborca block with the Cambrian rocks on it. These stars are where the Precambrian crops out along the fault. This is a place that Jose Luis knows well because this is a very nice, beautifully exposed suite of Precambrian rocks there in central Sonora, east of Cucurpe. Here are the Jurassic rocks. So one of the things that we wanted to do was figure out where this fault went. Well, then you go underneath the Sierra Madre Occidental, where there are no exposures, although there's some big gold mines in here that are probably related to the Megashear, or maybe related to the Megashear. And then you go over to here, and that little dot right there is Terai Formation. Terai Formation is quite important, and it was the PhD thesis for Diego Cordova way back when. And the thing was that it's about 800 kilometers from here. So the reasoning is that if you move North America along this line over to that point, then you have the arc-like rocks, and you have some arc-like rocks here, and then you also have melange, which is compatible with the idea of having this displacement. Now this is a reconstruction, and it's not a very good reconstruction because unfortunately we didn't have a good globe geometry where the geology was well placed, let's say. We didn't have time to make one, so we used we just used another projection, which is not very good because it's a flat piece of paper, and but you're moving this, you're restoring it along a curved fault. So there's this big gap in here, But if you do that, if you move this 800 kilometers along here, then the myogeocline is opposite the Caborca block. The Jurassic rocks over here are opposite the Terai. So that was a positive aspect of this. What that results in is a reconstruction that looks kind of like this. So here's the melange and the arc going along here. Here's Terai. There's a little bit of arc rock over there. But what seems to be required is that Terai comes outside of the Caborca block. So now we want to go to the San Andreas because I want to use the San Andreas as a model for what I think that the Megashear might have looked like. So here we are looking at up the San Andreas from basically Hermosillo. Okay, so we're down in here in Hermosillo, way down here. This is the big volcano, the volcanic field there. So we're down in here in Sonora, and we're looking up here. Here's the Gulf. Here's the end of the San Andreas. What's important about this is that the San Andreas comes up to this point and it steps to the right. It steps to the right. When that happens, it forms what is called an extensional releasing bend. So this is Cerro Prieto, and then it goes a little further, and then it steps to the right again. This is the Salton Depression. This is the below sea level area of California. And then it continues towards Los Angeles. Here's Los Angeles. But then it makes a big bend to the left. And because of that, because this side is moving in that direction, and this is moving this way, this then becomes a zone of contraction. And this is called a restraining bend. In addition to that geometry along the fault, there are also some very important splays or strands, additional strands of right lateral faults. This is the San Jacinto fault, and this is the Elsinore fault. Now, I want to show you some relationships in here which are kind of nice and informative. This is the Salton Depression here. So actually, notice that the fault is not here. It's a solid line, and once it gets to the northern end of the Salton Depression, it becomes kind of difficult to follow. That's because the main opening steps down this way and then continues there. Here's Cerro Prieto, it steps again. So we're seeing those steps on the map. Now, this is a little tricky, but here's the Salton Depression. The fault comes this way, steps across, and then goes along there. Now in the vicinity of the San Jacinto fault, it's rather complicated, but actually the Clark Fault and the Coyote are splays along the San Andreas. So if you come down the Clark Fault, there's a step to the right. There's a linkage between the Clark Fault to the Coyote Creek Fault. Notice what happens. This becomes a very big normal fault, and here we have a basin. So what this is nice about this is here everything's covered up by water, and you don't see the relief that results from the extension that takes place along one of these releasing bend steps. So this is a big hole in the crust that's caused by the step from the Clark Fault down to the Coyote. Because what's happened here is, in order to restore this, we would take this piece and close it up to the south. In contrast to that, here's another picture that involves the transpression along the San Andreas Fault. And here we have a left step, and now the two sides are pushing against one another. This is an important fault called the Sierra Madre Fault. And along the Sierra Madre Fault, there's some thrusts, so that the San Gabriel Mountains here, there's a San Andreas, San Gabriel Mountains are coming up, the San Bernardino Mountains are coming up, they're pushing out because everything is being shortened, everything is coming together on both sides. So these are the San Gabriel Mountains. They're very impressive. They rise about 3 kilometers, right straight, the ocean is right out here. So they just come up out of the ground. They're like, sometimes they describe them as watermelon seeds, but they don't come up vertically. They come up basically along thrust faults. But what's impressive about them is they really stick up very high in the air. So now we're going to come into Sonora. And this is a map by John Nurse in 2001 after he was finishing his PhD. And John's PhD focused on these rocks in here, which are mainly core complex-like rocks. They're strongly foliated, they're strongly lineated. The lineation has a very consistent orientation. And he published a paper about these things in about, I forget, 1995 or 1998. But in addition to that, he recognized some other things that he began to talk a lot about. See these little dots in here, these little dots here, and little dots down in here, and little dots over here in Chinati. Those are all Cretaceous rocks. And many of those rocks have an early Cretaceous age. And so in addition to that, there's some coarse conglomerate at the base of the section. And the reasoning is that those basins opened up, probably related in Jurassic time, probably related to releasing steps along the Mojave-Sonora fault, and that then the Bisbee group accumulated, or these Cretaceous rocks accumulated in those basins. So we want to keep our eye on these basins because they're rather important. Now, Jose Luis has spent a lot of time mapping in this basin right here, and it has its own set of very interesting, very complicated relationships, but it's largely filled with these Cretaceous rocks. All right, so this is just a diagram, and what I tried to do here was emphasize three things, three sets of faults. So here the red fault, that's basically the inferred trace. Now, one of the difficulties with the Mojave-Sonora Megashear is it's been so deformed by extension that every place you go pretty much along the fault, what you see is you say, well, this is the big fault, and it's dirt. There's no expression. But there are some places where you can see some things. There's a place here in Sonoita where there's a big monazite zone, and you can actually see the contact with it on either side of the monazite zone of Jurassic against, up there in Sonoita, against Triassic plutons. There's a big feldspathic pluton there. So we wrote a paper about that in 2003. And also if you go right to Caborca, Caborca is a good place because you can see at Caborca the calcareous rocks, Paleozoic age and Neoproterozoic, mainly Paleozoic age. And you can see right across the highway from Caborca these Jurassic sediments. If you just go up the highway a little bit, you can bring the exposures of the Paleozoic carbonates quite close to the Jurassic. Well, guess what? Well, then there's a low angle structure that comes through, and then you see tertiary sediments on top of the Jurassic, and it gets complicated again. But another suite of structures is shown by this orange-brown pattern. Oh, by the way, these are just my effort to kind of put a red line around those areas of Cretaceous sediments. This would be the northern end of the San Antonio Basin right here. Orange-brown things. Well, these are Oligocene faults, very, very likely. And Oligocene faults have a very systematic north 30 west trend. And in addition to that, their ages, there was a strong extension between 35 and 20. Besides the Oligocene, you see these things. These are the typical basin and range structures. Here they are here, they're more north-south. They were between 18 and today, some of them are still active. Now, what you have to try and do is visualize in your mind the amount of extension, and I don't know what that extension is, that was taken up by these Oligocene faults and these Miocene faults. What you know is that the extension is going to be orthogonal to the strike of these normal faults. So the Oligocene basically was southwest directed, and the Miocene is more west directed. Now, in the western U.S., we can see these three sets. Now in Sonora, the Miocene, and by the way, these need to be flipped. This is interesting. 18 goes up here, 35, 20 goes down here. But there are three episodes of strong tertiary extension. And the strong tertiary extension is Eocene. This is about north 73 west, more or less between 55 and 41. And then the Oligocene is well developed here in the Southwest, in Arizona and in Sonora, very well developed. And it's between about 35 and 20, and then the Miocene's younger. Now, what you read in the books, and there's a very famous guy who's written a lot of papers about post-orogenic collapse. Post-orogenic collapse. That means you have a big mountain built, and then because you stack up all these rocks, they just kind of slowly collapse caused by gravity. Well, if you think about that, what would you expect to get? Well, if you're just going to take you take a ball that you make a tortilla out of. Okay, so you have a ball. Now, if you just push down on that ball, what do you get? Well, you get a tortilla or a pancake. But what we see here, in one of the remarkable things about core complexes, is the direction. The direction of extension is very consistent. And where the rocks are ductile, you see a very consistently oriented lineation. And if you want to see this for Mexico, go back to John Nurse's paper, and he has many, many of these diagrams that show that they're pretty doggone consistent. Not perfect, but pretty consistent. Because one of the things is that the Miocene has then deformed the Oligocene faults. So that's a little complicated. So these very, very interesting rocks where they develop as ductile domains are called core complexes. And here's what one of the stereoplots look like. Very consistent. And George Davis, who is a guy that worked in Arizona on these things, said you can set your compass. These are always, south 60 east, north 60 west. That's where the lineations go. And that stretching also is accommodated by these very profound faults called detachments. So we see normal faults, and they go into these detachments. Now, in Aconchi, here's the Aconchi batholith, okay? And this is very likely an Oligocene normal fault that bounds the Aconchi fault. Why do I say that? I say that because this is about north 30 west, and this is the typical direction for Oligocene normal faults. So you say, well, why isn't this broken? Well, there are places where you can see, for example, here, no, that's the river. Let's just go on to the next one where you can see, this is up by Nacosari, okay? Here's some of the mines there. Now, here you can still see some faults that are northwest striking faults. Here's some northwest striking faults. But these are being broken by faults like this. This is probably a basin and range fault. So here you see a good relationship. An older fault cut by an Oligocene fault, probably cut by a Miocene fault. So these valleys in here are composite valleys. They're recording 2 episodes of extension and opening. Now we go to this quite interesting diagram by Izaguirre et al. In 2016, and they were distinguishing this Caborca gold belt shown in pale yellow. And what you see is that if you put the Megashear on this, and by the way, Izaguirre and Iriondo, they don't like the Megashear, so they don't show it on here. So I put the Megashear on here, and it runs right through the middle of this Caborca belt. And I also showed some of these other normal faults, and these faults are inferred faults. If you say, well, Tom, I want you to show me the fault. I can't show you the fault. But what's remarkable is you see these ranges and the orientation of the ranges. And it just seems to me that that's a very likely indication of that faulting. So now we're going to talk about some of these mines and how they may relate to the releasing bands of the Megashear. And what we'll do is we're going to start here right on the fault at Choya, and then we go down here, and La Virgen is not a big mine. It's just a little tiny thing, but it's in the Precambrian, and it seems to resemble the relationships that we see at San Francisco. But before we do that, I want to give you an insight into more of exactly why we think these basins, and we're going to look at the Bisbee Basin and the San Antonio Basin, why we think those basins are marking pull-aparts of Jurassic age. These basins are filled with conglomerate that that has been attributed to filling of the basin in in latest Jurassic and earliest Cretaceous time. So let's go up there to Bisbee. This is the type area of the Bisbee Basin. And this is the type area in the Gold Hill block of Glance conglomerate. And as you see, it comes way down here into Sonora. And it's really a pretty spectacular bunch of rocks. And this is where you go up here to Bisbee, and this is a big, right on this releasing bend. So this is a strike slip fault. This is probably a strike slip fault, okay? These are strike slip faults. So when I show you that Bisbee Basin, the Bisbee Basin is even more complicated because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, perhaps strike slip faults within the Bisbee Basin. And they all make their own little sub-basins. But be that as it may, let's focus on this one, which has this very impressive body of Glance conglomerate. Now it's complicated by the fact this black things, okay? These black things are big slabs of Mural limestone. And you say, well, that's a very odd looking slab. Well, that's because in Sierra San Jose, these things are folded and they're bent and twisted, and they're the same thing that's happened in the San Antonio Basin that's been mapped by Jose Luis Rodriguez has happened up here. These are great big pieces of mural that accumulated, and it's not clear. They may have accumulated up here and then slid into the basin about 105 million years ago. So now let's go to here's the Cananea block. So let's go across the Cananea block and let's check out, here's the Cananea block. This is one from Jose Luis's diagrams. And we're gonna go in here into this big San Antonio Basin. Now, in the San Antonio Basin, I had a student map there, and Jose Luis has done much more mapping in this basin, but I'm just more familiar with this little map by Mary Beth Kitts McKee. And what you can see in this basin is you can actually see the Bisbee group. Here's the section right here along this cross section. You can see it up here. And then what happens is that as you come south, you get into this zone of intense deformation and disaggregation, breakup. These little chunks and bits and pieces. And these things are very distinctive rocks. They're full of fossils and they're limestones and this, that, and the other. But it appears as though there has been a very impressive breakup and disaggregation of these rocks during what we think is gravity sliding, big slides. And notice that the divergence or the direction of transport is to the south. So these things are sliding downhill and flopping over and making these big structures. This is also where the Santa Gertrudis mine is. So let's go visit those points I want to talk about. This is the gold belt, and it goes up into here. I didn't realize this, but this is quite interesting because we bring the Megashear up here to Sonoita, and then we kind of step it over this way, and carry it up this way. And this step, I don't know how much of that step is related to a real link between strands of a fault, or this could be emphasized by extension. I'm not sure which of those are. But we're going to start here at La Cholla and then go on down here to San Francisco. So here's the setup at La Cholla. Here are the big mines, and the big mines at La Cholla are this one in Jurassic granite and this one in Jurassic granite. This is the Megashear right there. Now, Alex Iriondo would say, well, no, that's a big thrust fault. Yes, it is a big thrust fault. But I think what happened here is that what's called the Nevada orogeny, which was actually synchronous at the same time as the development, or just followed the early development of Megashear, was a big contractional event. So the poor Megashear is kind of flopped over on its side, and it's thrusting here. So these rocks are intensely deformed, and Alex would say, well, those things, that's all Cretaceous deformation, because he gets potassium-argon ages, and he's convinced that that's Cretaceous. But what it makes this becomes a unique place, because most of the other Cretaceous rocks, in fact, all of the other Cretaceous rocks, and the plutons of Cretaceous age don't seem to show this intensity of deformation. So I speculate that some of this deformation, or if not all of it, is Jurassic deformation. Now up here, there's a very nice place. This place is called Kitobak. They had an old mine there, and if you go there, you can see the relationships. It's all dug out. You can see the thrust. This is Caborca block basement, and it's pushing into the Jurassic arc. So the relationship here is the relationship here is the Megashear type of relationship. Now let's go down. We're going to go down to Estación Llano, which is here at the San Francisco mine. And this is the we're coming from Caborca. Here's El Chinate, another big mine in Cretaceous rocks. So we come down here, and this is Santa Ana. And then we just go down here a little bit further. And this is the geology. These are Precambrian rocks. So I speculate the Megashear is probably just at the tip of these Precambrian rocks. It seems to come down the valley here from Caborca. Now, if you look at the mine here, this is a Timmins. This was a Timmins mine. This is the San Francisco pit. These are all Precambrian rocks. And what's interesting about this particular area is that if we look at a cross section, these are where cross sections are. If we look at a cross section, the ore zones, the ore bodies are parallel to the layering in the Precambrian. So what we can say about La Cholla is the mineralization has to be younger than Jurassic. What we can say about San Francisco is the mineralization has to be younger than Precambrian. Now we go to La Herradura, which is up here a little farther. Where is it? I'm losing. It's along that fault, I think. This is the relationship there, and what you see is a body of Precambrian, which is apparently very highly fractured, and these are Paleozoic rocks. These are Jurassic rocks, and the Precambrian is mineralized, is shown here. There's a little bit of mineralization here in the Jurassic, but most of it is in the Precambrian. And apparently it's in the Precambrian because according the Precambrian is very highly intensely fractured. So this is the geology of the area here. And notice that these are the Precambrian, the 1.7 Precambrian. This is Caborca block basement. And then across this big fault, you have rhyolite at 168 and andesite at 159. These units are contemporaneous with Megashear faulting. I think that it's possible that this is a big pull-apart basin. And the reason that this is so highly fractured is the Precambrian was broken along the fault, whereas this stuff is syn fault, and so it came out and it's not quite as broken up as the Precambrian. So the mineralization's in the Precambrian. Now keep these ages in mind, 168 and 159. So if you go a little farther north, you see a very different situation. And a number of people approached me at the mining meeting and said, well, this is not right. These things are more similar than they appear to be. But what's important to me are the ages, because we know this is 169 and 158 here, but up in here, these are older. These have ages that are more typical of the arc rock. See, they're a little bit older, 176 and 178. So how can that be? Well, if it's true, then what that means is we're way out here in the Caborca block. If it's true, it means that the arc was right here. And when we were working this area, La Herradura was out in the sand. We were afraid to go there. There weren't very many roads. We didn't have a dune buggy. And so we didn't get good information from there. But what apparently is out there is a little bit of arc rocks, and those arc rocks were broken in Jurassic time by a strand related to the Megashear. That's an interpretation. I don't know if that's true or not. So now we're going to go to another area in here. We're going to go to Chinate. Here's Chinate here. Chinate turns out to be a very serious mine. It's a big mine. This is work, once again, by John Nurse. And these are detachment faults that are probably Oligocene. This is Cerro Carnero. That for sure has a pluton in there that's 20. and it has lineations, and this is a little tiny core complex right here. So if we look at the work, John did a lot of work in Batamote, and Cesar Yax did a lot of work and did his PhD here in El Chinate. And John made a very nice cross-section across here. And so what you see here is a big section, but it's pretty strongly folded. So the top of the section is El Charro, and then it's a big syncline. These are all Bisbee Cretaceous rocks. And then you come over here, and as you go down through this limb, synclinal limb, you get into these conglomerates. So these conglomerates, some of these are very likely glance conglomerate related. So the interpretation would be that this is a pull apart basin, and that the mine, which you see here, here's Chinate mine, right on the Chinate fault. The Chinate fault is an additional splay or strand within the basin, just like the Bisbee Basin. And so here's the Chinate range, here's Batamote. So if we look at, again, and all of this stuff is in the computer, it's very nice, you can get at this. Here's a beautiful image where you look up this way, and here's the fault, here's the big Chinate mine, and then High Vista has said, well, it looks as though there might be some more mineralization up at this end. So if you go to that end, if you come up here, what happens? Well, this is at an area where a student of mine, Franco Corona, did some mapping, and it's very strongly deformed. This is all Jurassic, and there's a mine up there called La Republicana, and La Republicana is just a small mine along a thrust fault. It has quartz veins, gold-bearing quartz veins, but the difference here is that this mine is telling us it has to be younger than Jurassic. This mine at Chinate says that the mineralization is younger than Cretaceous. John Nurse did a lot of mapping in this area over here, and these other, now don't get confused, this is also San Francisco, but this is a different San Francisco. So if we look at John's sections, what you see is lots of these quartz veins, similar in some cases to La Republicana, but with a different dip, because La Republicana is dipping this way. But these are gold-bearing quartz veins that he infers as being Jurassic. Then these quartz veins are being cut by normal faults that are probably related to Oligocene extension. Okay, from there, we're going to go to another place. We're going to go over here to San Antonio Basin. So let's show you where those are. We're going to go right over to there and to there. This is a famous place called Santa Gertrudis, and it's famous in the sense that it's the first place where they started to find a lot of gold and develop big gold mines in Cretaceous rocks. So here is San Antonio Basin right there. Santa Gertrudis would be about in here. This is probably a strike slip fault, left lateral, and it steps left and goes over here to more or less to Imoris, and then it goes along what's called the Imoris lineament. So this is the prospect map for Santa Gertrudis, and these are all places where they were mining, and you can see that the Cretaceous rocks are destroyed. They're all torn and ripped and folded. Here's a little tiny fold down there, but nevertheless, they're bits and pieces, and this is part of that same area that Mary Beth Kitts mapped for her dissertation, but that was before they were doing the mining. The ore is not developed in the Morale limestone, which records the deformation very, very nicely. It's recorded in some siltstones above the Morale limestone. Now, if you go across, here's the edge of the San Antonio Basin right there. If you go across here and you step over to the left, here's the Imoris lineament right here. Well, there's another mine that's being developed up here in what's called the Cumaral property. And Cumaral is another very interesting place because this, for all the world, looks like it's an Oligocene detachment. I'm sure John Nurse would map it as that, and notice that the ore bodies are along the detachment fault, the main detachment fault, and the subsidiary normal faults here. So what this means is what? Now, the mineralization is younger than Precambrian, younger than Jurassic, younger than Cretaceous. Here, it's probably younger than, or at the same time as Oligocene. So now, I want to go down here to Clemente, because I was really surprised by this. I didn't realize it was so young. So in Clemente, that's another prospect. And here's the Clemente prospect. These are some very big ranges. This is Rajon and I forget what this is, Viejo, I guess. And this is Jurassic, and then there's a beautiful Precambrian section in here, and then there's a lot of Precambrian. These things are mainly, these rich purple are mainly Precambrian basement. So I want to visit with you to these three places. This is an area that I mapped. This is in the Cerros Berruga. This is the Clemente prospect. And this is a place that was mapped by a master's student from San Diego State. And each one of these places has some similar structures expressed. So if we go here, this is the Precambrian basement. Here, this is a big breccia body, and it looks for all the world as though it's the type of breccia that may form along a detachment. It's not ductile, it's brittle. If you go over here, this is Providor quartzite. It has scolithus tubes in it. And this little seam right here looks to me to be probably Jurassic, and then there's basement here. So what we can say is that this is mainly carbonate breccia. And this is not carbonate breccia, this is just some conglomerates and siltstones, and I think a little volcanic rock here. But what's important is that there has to be a tremendous thickness of section missing between the Cambrian and the Jurassic, the Cambrian, Jurassic, and the basement. And we know here's another unconformity. This is Neoproterozoic right here. All right. So this is a complicated area, but what you can say is there's been a lot of apparent attenuation of section, probably caused by normal faulting. Now let's go over here to this Santa Rosa area, and this is Cerro Colorado. There's a mine, there's a gold mine up here, but I want to draw your attention to all these orange lines. This in particular, this is basement. That's Precambrian basement, old Precambrian basement, not Neoproterozoic. That's crystalline basement. And notice here's a clippa. Well, this is Jurassic. So now what one can say is, along this fault, all of the Paleozoic is gone, all the Neoproterozoic is gone, all the Triassic is gone. So this is a great big fault. Now you can say, well, how do you know it's not erosion? Well, if it's erosion, it's only localized, so it's a little strange. So again and again, see, this is Precambrian basement, this is Jurassic. Now, right here, there seems to be some break, probably a rather big fault that's in this area, because now you step from Jurassic into Precambrian, not Precambrian, but carbonates of lower Paleozoic, perhaps of Neoproterozoic. So now let's go to the Clemente prospect. Well, what you see at the Clemente prospect is quite a bit of deformation. This is the basement. These are Neoproterozoic rocks right there. These are my lines, because what I see is a lot of deformation, but the basement's not deformed. These rocks are bent and deformed, and so once again, there's been a detachment along each of these orange lines that I think can be demonstrated by the amount of deformation in these rock layers. And so some of the layers are dipping right into the basement. That's impossible. There has to be a fault underneath them. And I would go on to say that because you see in Clemente this big fold, but you don't see necessarily a big fold in the basement, because there's basement on both sides. There's basement here and basement here. That this entire package all the way around has been detached. So it's just a scary business in central Sonora, or this part of Sonora, to distinguish among these structures. But what we know is that there may be some mineralization taking place. So we talk about the age of mineralization. This is from La Herradura, where the mineralization is 80 to 45. This is an age that's based from a PhD student, I think, at Arizona, and they calculated an age of 61. Okay, so these are ages that Alex has generated, as well as some other people, and notice they fall between 70 and 40. So there are a variety of different ages, all of which are younger than the Megashear. So the Megashear does not make the gold. What the Megashear does is it accommodates the passage of the gold up to the surface. Okay, now, one of the other things that was pretty cool, I thought, was that there are two papers. This Goldfarb paper, Goldfarb in 2008, and Isaguirre et al. 2016, and they made the point that there was this big band of gold mining development all along the west coast of North America. Now one of the things that I didn't know what to do with this big damn fault, this Megashear, and we thought that it ended somehow in some kind of plate tectonic interaction, but one of the things that's happened during the time following that Megashear paper volume in the last 10 years, I found a bunch of features that I just felt, all of these are pull-apart basins. So there's a lot of transtension along the fault. And then you can go up to here, and the Great Valley of California looks like it formed during, it's a pull-apart basin. See here, come up here, left step, that's a pull-apart. Then this area in here in Nevada, that's all extensional. Then you come up here into Canada, and there's more extension all along here. And then you come up to Alaska, there's more extension. All this extension, these basins started to form about 170 million years ago. So I said, well, I can use that. So I just take the fault and kind of, well, this is where we already had the fault here. And and then just bring it up and follow that area like so. And this is deformed because there's been a lot of subsequent deformation, tertiary and Cretaceous movement of the plate along here. So the big strand of the fault's deformed there. Uh-oh, wait a minute, I gotta go back. So what I did was, I took that yellow line, and that yellow line is in a paper that I put, the long paper in this volume in 2015, in this last December. And it's a special paper, 513. And I emphasize these papers because Silver and I took a lot of criticism because we didn't get the evidence for the Megashear published. And finally, I went to Lee and I said, we have to publish this. And so I said, I'm going to publish it no matter what you say, because he would always say, well, you know, I have a better idea. We don't want to publish it yet, you know, and we just had to get it done. So then this idea, so I just went ahead and published this because this is independent of Lee Silver, who was my mentor at Caltech. So I took the yellow line and I just slapped it on here, and I used this, here's a big restraining bend there. And so what we can say is that it looks as though many of the gold deposits along the western margin of the United States of diverse ages utilized this big fault as a conduit for the passage of gold-bearing fluids. Now, it's not the only place, because there are lots of other places here. You can see here, this is just, this is in California. This is the gold belt of California. And you see these are Cretaceous. There's some Cretaceous ages in California. But I'm going to just take you to, these are just places. This is the Blue Mountains. This is where the Megashear is postulated to be. It comes right through here. Here are the gold deposits in the Blue Mountains. Okay, so this is in where the Megashear goes through here. This is in Bridge River in British Columbia. This is in Alaska. This is the Sum Dum Fault, and there's some big gold mines shown by these shovels here. But what I want to get to is Colorado Mineral Belt. Because the Colorado Mineral Belt is a famous area where there are lots of little gold mines and there's some little intrusions. But what's important about the Colorado Mineral Belt is it corresponds with deformational zone in the Precambrian rocks. And if you go on from there, This is the Carlin Trend in Nevada. The Carlin Trend very likely corresponds to a big structure, probably a deep fault in the Great Basin. So, with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, please ask me, because, you know, for many decades, no, several decades, people have said that this is a crazy idea. So if you think it's a crazy idea, you should say so, and then we can talk about it. Thank you very much. So questions, comments?
¿Alguna pregunta que le quieran hacer al doctor? Bueno, yo voy a empezar entonces. Perdón. Well, about the Jurassic rocks, there were on Beruga, yeah. So there was a map there. I think it's yours. So where's the boundary? Because I got a little confused at the beginning. The original hypothesis was what north from Caborca, right?
Yes.
Because of the from the highway, yeah. So.
Okay, so the question is, one of the reasons that there appears to be a major discontinuity at Caborca is that the Caborca block is against the Jurassic arc. And then at the end of the talk, I showed an area where I said, well, look at all these Jurassic rocks. Well, it turns out that the Jurassic rocks there at Sierra Santa Rosa are similar to some of the Jurassic rocks at, for example, Antimonio. They are early Jurassic. They're early Jurassic. They have fossils. They're mainly sediments, although they go up into some volcanic rocks. But by and large, they are different and have a different composition than the Jurassic rocks that crop out in Cerros Alamo or Basura, for example. So there's a little difference in those Jurassic rocks, but that's a very good observation. So we have a suite of Jurassic rocks that is similar to the section in Antimonio. And those rocks actually have a very distinctive carbonate of Triassic age called the Luning Formation. And the fossils in the Luning Formation at El Antimonio are exactly the same as fossils from Luning, Nevada. And that was another thing that we used for correlation purposes. Good point.
Yeah, yes. So south from there, you haven't found any Jurassic rocks south from Beruga?
No. But that's one of the things that I thought that the work that was done at Cerro Prieto, north of Herradura, is very important, because we did not find Jurassic arc rocks in Western Sonora, mainly because we didn't do a great deal of work there, just because we didn't have the equipment. There were no roads. This was a long time ago, and there were no roads there. And we made one traverse along the coast of Sonora in, 1970. It was dirt, and it's a big adventure, but we didn't find any Jurassic plutonic rocks. Apparently, that doesn't mean they're not there, because what they're reporting is they're reporting Jurassic arc rocks. And so the result of the geometry, that when you see the restoration, is you get the Jurassic arc rocks over there, Terai, and then they swing underneath the Sierra Madre Occidental, and then they swing west of the Caborca block. So it's okay if they're there. Yeah, we just didn't find them.
Thank you.
Voy a preguntar en español y luego voy a tratar de traducir. Hay algunas líneas de evidencia que están, al parecer, en contra del desplazamiento de 800 kilómetros de la Mojave-Sonora Megashear. Una de ellas son los basamentos precámbricos. El basamento precámbrico que se ha encontrado al sur del Megashear, en el área de Tamaulipas, es un grembiliano con metamorfismo granulítico, el cual no se encuentra en Sonora. Y tampoco ya se ha encontrado a mi conocimiento, no se han encontrado secuencias similares a las secuencias precámbricas Proterozoico tardío de Mazalzal que deberían de estar desplazadas supuestamente para allá. Otra línea de evidencia son la prolongación propuesta por Poole de la Mojave, del Appalachian Maratón Ouachita, que al parecer se prolonga hacia Sonora. Él propuso que esas secuencias y esos cabalgamientos paleozoicos que vienen desde el norte de los Apalaches, siguen por el cinturón Maratón Ouachita, continuaban en Sonora, básicamente en Sonora Central, y que corresponden al cierre del supercontinente Pangea. Entonces, si él de hecho indica en el trabajo que ustedes hicieron en el 2005, él indica que si esa prolongación existe, que él propone eso, pues la Mojave-Sonora Megashear con 800 kilómetros de desplazamiento del Jurásico tardío no podría ser. Otra línea de evidencia que parece oponerse a la Mojave-Sonora son los gráficos de circones detríticos de las formaciones volcanos sedimentarias del Jurásico tardío. Las que están en el norte de Sonora, que supuestamente fueron desplazadas hacia el área de Zacatecas y esa San Luis Potosí en la formación Nazas, ¿no? Esas secuencias tienen gráficos de circones detríticos muy diferentes, ¿no? Las que están en Sonora, pues claramente tienen circones detríticos asociados al basamento proterozoico de la región, entre otros. En cambio, los circones detríticos de NASA son muy distintos. Entonces hay una serie de evidencias que parecen. Otro aspecto que quería mencionar, pues, es que hay otros eventos, por ejemplo, podía ser esas fallas de cabalgadura jurásicas, pudieran ser fallas profundas que pudieron haber controlado la mineralización porque están más cerca del evento de mineralización que fallas más antiguas.
I don't know how much of that I got, but let me start with the first 2 points I think that you made. One is the Grenville, because the Grenville at Novillo. Now the Grenville Grenville orogenic belt is in Texas, and then there are little bits of it maybe in Chihuahua, and of course it's in Tamaulipas. But it's curving today. It's curving in towards southern Mexico. Now Fernando Ortega would say, well, there's a big body of Grenville there, but the Grenville I think has been offset, and if we take North America and you know it's rotating, it rotated clockwise. If we restore it back, then it'll basically take Grenville perhaps underneath in the vicinity of Chihuahua and move it back towards those outcrops of Tamaulipas. And I think the other point you make about the Paleozoic rocks, this is a point that Barney Poole made. He said, listen, I think the Paleozoic rocks in Texas look similar to the Paleozoic rocks in southern Sonora. And the point is that could be very true. And in fact, it probably is true. And so the Caborca block is a how do you say, I don't know how you say it. It's a bulge, it's a protrusion. And it's probably true that the Paleozoic rocks curved right through the Caborca block and then went over to the rest of the Appalachians. So when North America moved, here's Caborca block here, North America moved, and those Paleozoic rocks are now up in Nevada. And so when you restore them, it comes back, and the Paleozoic comes all the way around and probably wraps right around the southern edge of North America. So it just depends on and the problem is that a lot of it is covered up, but it's not, it's viable. It's viable to do it that way. Now, you had some other comments, and I missed some of those things. What were some of the key points? No, I can't.
Yeah, the detrital circums, that were found in Lake Jurassic rocks in Sonora, and how are they correlated with the basement? The ones on Sonora here are more related to the basement here from Sonora, and other ones in Nazas at different.
The Nazas rocks are correlate very, very well with the rocks in northeastern Sonora. And there's been some dating done by Lawton, and they have the very similar age. They're 170 million-year-old volcanic rocks. So the Nazas is not an issue. It's part of the Jurassic arc sequence.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Cedo el micrófono.
Tardes de Geocafé, la Estación Regional del Noroeste del UNAM, Culturés de la Dirección de Vinculación y Difusión de la Unison y el Colegio de Ciudadanos de Sonora le agradecen al doctor Tomás Anderson por su plática Megashear Mojave-Sonora.
Gracias a ustedes.